Hello, my lovely visitors. My name is Anna. Welcome back to the Witch House, where I read you bedtime stories from all over the world. And today I'm going to read you the second part of the gothic horror novella by Nikolai Gogol, V. So if you are ready, just close your eyes and listen. When the sun began to set, the dead girl was taken to the church. The philosopher supported the black-draped coffin with one shoulder, and on that shoulder he felt something cold as ice. The chief himself walked in front, bearing the right side of the dead girl's cramped house. The blackened wooden church, adorned with green moss and topped by three conical cupolas, stood desolate almost at the edge of the village. One could see it was long since any service had been celebrated in it. Candles burned before almost every icon. The coffin was placed in the middle, right in front of the altar. The old chief kissed the dead girl once more, made a prostration, and walked out together with the bearers, ordering the philosopher to be given a good meal and taken to the church after supper. Going into the kitchen, all those who had carried the coffin started touching the stove, something people in Little Russia have the custom of doing after they see a dead body. The hunger that the philosopher began to feel just then made him forget all about the deceased for a few moments. Soon all the household servants began gradually to gather in the kitchen. The kitchen of the chief's house was something like a club, to which everything that inhabited the yard floats, including the dogs who came right up to the door wagging their tails for bones and scraps. Wherever anyone might be sent, or wherever errands, he would always stop at the kitchen first, to rest on a bench for a moment and smoke a pipe. The bachelors who lived in the house and paraded around in cossack blouses all lay about here for almost the whole day, on the benches, under the benches, on the stove, in short, wherever they could find a comfortable place to lie. Besides, everybody was forever forgetting something in the kitchen: a hat, a knut for stray dogs, or the like. But the most numerous gathering was at supper time, when the horse herds came after rounding up all his horses, and the cow herds after bringing the cows home from milking, and all the rest who were not to be seen in the course of the day. During supper, loquacity would come to the most taciturn tongues. Here everything was usually talked about: someone who was having new trousers made for himself, and what was inside the earth, and someone who had seen a wolf. There were numerous one-notists here, of whom there is no lack among the people of Little Russia. The philosopher sat down with the others in a wide circle under the open sky in front of the kitchen porch. Soon a woman in a red cap stuck herself out the door holding a hot pot of dumplings with both hands and placed it in the midst of those ready to eat. Each of them took a wooden spoon from his pocket, or some lacking a spoon, a splinter of wood. As soon as the mouths began to move, a bit more slowly, and the wolfish appetite of the whole gathering subsided a little, many began to talk. The talk naturally had to turn to the dead girl. "Is it true," said one young shepherd, who had stuck so many buttons and brass badges on his leather pipe strap that he looked like a mercer's shop, "is it true that the young miss, not to speak ill of her, kept company with the unclean one?" "Who? The young miss?" said Darash, already known to our philosopher. "But she was a downright witch. I'll swear she was a witch." "Enough, Darash," said another, the one who had shown such readiness to give comfort during the trip. "God help them, it's none of our business. No point in talking about it." But Darash was not at all disposed to be silent. He had only just gone to the cellar with the steward on some necessary business, and after bending a couple of times to 2 or 3 barrels, had come out extremely cheerful and talking non-stop. "What do you want? For me to keep quiet?" he said. "But she wrote on me myself. By God she did." "And what, uncle?" said the young shepherds with the buttons. "Are there some tokens you can tell a witch by?" "No," answered Darosh. "There is no way to tell. Read through all the psalters, you still won't be able to tell." "You can too, Darosh. Don't say that," said the same comforter. "Not for nothing did God give everybody a special trait. People who've got some learning say witches have little tales. When a woman's old, she's a witch," the grey-haired Cossack said coolly. "Ah, you're a good lot too," picked up the woman, who was just done pouring flesh dumplings into the emptied pot. "Real fat boars." The old Cossack, whose name was Yevtuch, but who was nicknamed Kovtun, showed a smile of pleasure on his lips, seeing that his words had struck the old woman to the quick, and the cowherds let out such dance laughter as if 2 bulls facing each other had bellowed at once. The beginning conversation awakens an irrepressible desire and curiosity in the philosopher to learn more in detail about the chief's deceased daughter, and therefore, wishing to bring him back to the former matter, he addressed his neighbor with these words: "I wanted to ask, why is it that all the folks sitting here over supper consider the young miss a witch? What, did she cause some evil, or put a hex on somebody or other?" "There were all kinds of things," replied one of the seated men, with a smooth face extremely like a shovel. "And who doesn't remember the huntsman Nikita or that?" "And what about the huntsman Nikita?" said the philosopher. "Wait, I'll tell about the huntsman Nikita," said Darosh. "I'll tell about Nikita," said the herdsman, "because he was my child." "I'll tell about Nikita," said Spirit. "Let him. Let Spirit tell it," shouted the crowds. Spirit began. "You, Mr. Philosopher Homo, didn't know Nikita. Oh, what a rare man he was. He knew every dog like his own father, so he did. The present huntsman Nikolai, who's sitting far down from him, can't hold a candle to him. He also knows his business, but next to Nikita he's trash, slops." "You're telling it good, really good," said Darosh, nodding approvingly. Spirit went on. "He'd spot a rabbit quicker than you could take a pinch of snuff. He'd whistle, 'Here, rubber, here, racer,' and be off at full speed on his horse, and there'd be no telling whether he was ahead of the dog or the dog ahead of him. He'd toss off a pint of rotgut as if it had never been there. A fine huntsman he was. Only in more recent days, he started staring at the young miss all the time. Either he was really smitten, or she'd put a spell on him. Only it was the end of the man. He went on all soft, turns into devil knows what. It's even indecent to say it." "Good," said Darosh. The young miss would no sooner glance at him than he dropped the bridle, call rubber grouchy, stumble all over, and do God knows what. Once the young miss came to the stable where he was grooming a horse. "Nikitka," she says, "let me lay my little leg on you." And he, the tomfool, gets all happy. "Not only your little leg," he says, "you can sit right on me." The young miss lifted up her leg, and when he saw her bare leg, white and plump, the charm, he says, just stunned him. He bent his back, the tomfool grabbed her bare legs with both hands, and went galloping like a horse all over the fields, and he couldn't tell anything about where they rode, only he came back barely alive, and after that he got all wasted like a chip of wood. And once, when they came to the stable, instead of him there was just a heap of ashes and an empty bucket lying there. He burned up of his own self, and what a huntsman he was, You won't find another like him in the whole world. When Spirit finished his story, talk came from all sides about the merits of the former huntsman. "And have you heard about Shepticha?" said the Rosh, addressing Hama. "No." "Oh no, then it's clear they don't teach you much sense there in your seminary. Well, listen. In our settlements there is a Cossack named Sheptun, a good Cossack. He likes to steal or tell a lie sometimes about any need, but a good Cossack. His place isn't far from here. At the same time, as we're now having supper, Sheptun and his wife finished eating and went to bed, and since the weather was fine, Shepticha slept outside and Sheptun inside on a bench. Or no, it was Shepticha inside on a bench and Sheptun outside. And not on a bench. Shepticha lay on the floor the woman picked up, standing in the doorway, her cheek propped on her hands. The Rosh looked at her, then at the floor, then at her again, and after a pause said, "When I pull your underwear off in front of everybody, it won't be so nice." This warning had its effect. The old woman fell silent and did not interrupt anymore. The Rosh went on. "And in a cradle that hung in the middle of the hut lay there a 1-year-old baby. I don't know whether of male or female sex. Shepticha lay there, and then she heard the dog scratching outside the door and howling so loud you just wanted to flee the house. She got frightened, for women are such foolish folk that you could stick your tongue out at her behind the door at night and she'd have her heart in her mouth. Anyhow, she thinks, why don't I go and hit the cursed dog in the snoot? Maybe it'll stop howling. And taking her poker, she went to open the door. As soon as it was slightly open, the dog darted between her legs and went straight for the baby's cradle. Shepticha saw that it was no longer a dog, but the young miss, and if it had been the young miss looking the way she knew her, it would have been nothing. But there was this one thing and circumstance, that she was all blue, and her eyes were burning like coals. She grabbed the baby, bit its throat, and began drinking its blood. Shepticha only cried out, "Ah, evil thing," and fled. But she saw that the front doors were locked. She ran to the attic. The foolish woman sat there trembling, and then she saw that the young miss was coming to the attic. She fell on the foolish woman and started biting her. It was morning before Sheptun got his wife out of there, blue and bitten all over, and the next day the foolish woman died. That's what arrangements and temptations can happen. Though she is the master's progeny, all the same a witch is a witch. After this story, the Rosh looked around smugly and poked his forefinger into his pipe, preparing to fill it with tobacco. The material about the witch became inexhaustible. Each in turn hastened to tell something. The witch drove right up to the door of one man's house, in the form of a haystack. She stole another's hat or pipe, cut off the braids of many village girls, drank several buckets of blood from others. At last the whole company came to their senses and saw that they had been talking too much, because it was already quite dark outside. They all began trudging off to sleep, putting themselves either in the kitchen, or in the sheds, or in the middle of the yards. "Well now, Mr. Homa, it's time we went to the deceased," said the grey-haired Cossack, turning to the philosopher, and the four of them, Spirit and the Rosh included, went to the church, swinging their knoots at the dogs, of which there were a great many, and which angrily bit at their sticks. The philosopher, though he had fortified himself with a good mug of vodka, secretly felt timorousness creeping over him as they drew near the lighted church. The tales and strange stories he had heard helped to affect his imagination still more. The darkness under the paling and trees began to thin. The place was becoming more bare. They finally stepped past the decrepit church fence into the small yards, beyond which there were no trees and nothing open south, but empty fields and meadows swallowed by the darkness of night. Together with Homa, the three Cossacks climbed the steep steps of the porch and went into the church. Here they left the philosopher, having wished him successful performance of his duty, and locked the door on him, as the master had ordered. The philosopher remained alone. First he yawns, then stretched himself, then blew on both hands, and finally looked around. In the middle stood the black coffin. Candles flickered before dark icons. Their light illuminated only the iconostasis and faintly the middle of the church. The far corners of the vestibule were shrouded in darkness. The tall ancient iconostasis showed a profound decrepitude. Its open work, covered in golds, now gleamed only in sparks. The gilding had fallen off in some places and was quite blackened in others. The faces of the saints, completely darkened, looked somehow gloomy. The philosopher glanced around once more. "Why," he said, "what's frightening about it? No man can get in here, and against the dead, any visitors from the other worlds have got such prayers that, once I've read them, they'll never lay a finger on me." "Nothing to it," he said with a wave of the hands. "Let's read." Going up to the core, he saw several bundles of candles. "That's good," thought the philosopher. "I must light up the whole church so that it's bright as day. Too bad I can't smoke my pipe in God's church." And he began sticking wax candles to all the latches, lecterns and icons, not stinting in the least, and soon the whole church was filled with light. Only the darkness above seemed to become deeper, and the dark images looked more gloomily from the old carved frames on which gold gleamed here and there. He went up to the coffin, timidly looked into the dead girl's face, and could not help shutting his eyes with a slight start. Such terrible, dazzling beauty! He turned and wanted to step away, but with strange curiosity, with the strange self-contradictory feeling that will not leave a man, especially in a time of fear, he could not refrain from glancing at her as he went, and then, with the same feeling of trepidation, glancing once more. Indeed, the deceased girl's sharp beauty seemed frightful. Perhaps she even would not have struck him with such panic terror if she had been slightly ugly, but there was in her features nothing dull, lusterless, dead. The face was alive, and it seemed to the philosopher that she was looking at him through closed eyes. It even seemed to him that a tear rolled from under her right eyelash, and when it stopped her cheek, he made out clearly that it was a drop of blood. He hastily went over to the core, opened the book, and to cheer himself up, began reading in his loudest voice. His voice struck the wooden walls of the church, long silent and deaf. Solitary, without echo, it poured in a low bass into the utterly dead silence, and seemed a little wild, even to the reader himself. "What's there to be afraid of?" he thought to himself meanwhile. "She won't get up from her coffin, because she's afraid of God's words. Let her lie there. And what kind of Cossack am I if I'm scared? So I drank a bit, that's why it seems so frightening. If I could take some snuff, fine tobacco, nice tobacco, good tobacco." And yet, as he turned each page, he kept glancing sidelong at the coffin, and an involuntary feeling seemed to whisper to him, "Look, she's going to get up, she's going to rise, she's going to peek out of the coffin." But there was a deathly silence. The coffin stood motionless. The candles poured out a whole flood of light. Terrible is a lit-up church at night, with a dead body and not a living soul. Raising his voice, he began singing in various voices, trying to stifle the remnants of his fear. Yet he turned his eyes to the coffin every other moment, as if asking the inadvertent question, what if she rises? What if she gets up? But the coffin did not stir. If only there was a sound, some living being, even the chirp of a cricket in the corner. But there was just the slight sizzle of some remote candle and the faint spatter of wax dripping on the floor. Well, what if she gets up? She raised her head. He gazed wildly and rubbed his eyes, but she was indeed no longer lying, but sitting up in the coffin. He turned his eyes away, then again looked with horror at the coffin. She's standing up. She's walking for the church with her eyes closed, constantly spreading her arms as if wishing to catch someone. She was walking straight toward him. In fear, he drew a circle around himself. With an effort, he began reading prayers and reciting the incantations that had been taught him by one monk who had seen witches and unclean spirits all his life. She stood almost on the line itself, but it was clearly beyond her power to cross it, and she turns all blue, like someone dead for several days. Hama did not have the courage to look at her. She was frightful. She clacked her teeth and opened her dead eyes. But seeing nothing, she turned in every direction with fury that showed in her twitching face, and spreading her arms, clutched with them at every pillar and corner, trying to catch Hama. Finally, she stopped, shook her finger, and lay down in her coffin. The philosopher still could not come to his senses and kept glancing fearfully at the witch's cramped dwelling. Finally, the coffin suddenly tore from its place, and a whistle began flying all through the church, crossing the air in every direction. The philosopher saw it almost over his head. At the same time, he saw that it could not enter the circle he had drawn, so he stepped up his incantations. The coffin crashed down in the middle of the church and remained motionless. The corpse again rose up from it, blue, turning green, but just then came the distant crowing of a cock. The corpse sank back into the coffin, and the coffin lid slammed shut. The philosopher's heart was pounding and sweat streamed from him, but encouraged by the crowing of the cock, he quickly finished reading the pages he ought to have read earlier. At daybreak, he was relieved by the beadle and grey-haired Yevtuk, who on this occasion performed the duties of a church warden. Having gone to lie down, the philosopher was unable to fall asleep for a long time, but fatigue overcame him and he slept till dinner. When he woke up, all the events of the night seemed to have happened in a dream. To bolster his strength, he was given a pint of vodka. At dinner, he quickly relaxed, contributed observations on this and that, and ate a rather mature pig almost by himself. However, he did not venture to speak of his experiences in the church, from some feeling unaccountable to himself, and to the question of the curious replied, yes, there were all sorts of wonders. The philosopher was one of those people in whom, once they have been fed, an extraordinary philanthropy awakens. Pipe in his teeth, he lay looking at them all with extraordinary sweet eyes, and kept spitting to the side. After dinner, the philosopher was in the highest spirits. He managed to walk about the whole village and make the acquaintance of nearly everybody. He was even chased out of 2 cottages. One comely young wench gave him a decent whack on the back with a shovel when he decided to feel and find out what kind of material her blouse and kirtle were made of. But the closer it came to evening, the more pensive the philosopher grew. An hour before supper, Almost all the household people would gather to play kasha or kragli, a variety of skittles in which long sticks are used instead of balls, and the winner has the right to ride on his partner's back. Then the game would become very interesting for the spectator. Often the cowherds, broad as a pancake, got astride the swineherds, puny shirts consisting of nothing but wrinkles. And every time the cowherds would bend his back and the rush would jump onto it, always saying, "Hey, what a hefty boo." Those who were more sober-minded sat by the kitchen porch. They had an extremely serious air as they smoked their pipes, even when the young people laughed heartily over some witticism of the cowherd or spirit. In vain did Homa try to take part in this fun. Some dark thought, like a nail, was lodged in his head. Over supper, hard though he tried to cheer himself up, fear kindled in him as darkness spread over the sky. "Well, our time has come, Mr. Students," the familiar grey-haired Cossack said to him, getting up from his place together with the rush. "Let's go to work." Homa was again taken to the church in the same way. Again he was left alone, and the door was locked on him. No sooner was he left alone than timorousness began once more to creep into his breast. Again he saw the dark icons, the gleaming frames, and the familiar black coffin standing in menacing silence and immobility in the middle of the church. "Well," he said, "this marvel doesn't make me marvel now. It's only frightening the first time. Yes, it's only a little frightening the first time, and then it's not frightening anymore. Not frightening at all." He hastened to the core, drew a circle around himself, spoke several incantations, and began reading loudly, resolved not to raise his eyes from the book or pay attention to anything. He had been reading for about an hour already, and had begun to weary and to cough a little. He took a snuff bottle from his pocket, and before taking a pinch, timorously turned his gaze to the coffin. His heart went cold. The corpse was already standing before him, right in the line, fixing her dead green eyes on him. The student shuddered and felt a chill run through all his veins. Dropping his eyes to the book, he began reading his prayers and exorcisms, louder, and heard the corpse black her teeth again and wave her arm, wishing to seize him. But looking out of the corner of one eye, he saw that the corpse was trying to catch him in the wrong place and evidently could not see him. She was growling hollowly and began to utter dreadful words with her dead lips. They spluttered hoarsely, like the gurgling of boiling pitch. He could not have said what they meant, but something dreadful was contained in them. The philosopher fearfully realized that she was reciting incantations. Wind swept through the church at these words, and there was a noise, as of a multitude of fluttering wings. He heard wings beating against the glass of the church windows, and their iron frames, heard claws scratching iron with a rasping noise, and countless powers banging on the doors, trying to break in. His heart pounded heavily all the while. Shutting his eyes, he kept reading incantations and prayers. At last something suddenly whistled far away. It was the distant crowing of a cock. The exhausted philosopher stopped and rested his soul. Those who came to relieve the philosopher found him barely alive. He was leaning back against the wall, goggle-eyed, and stared fixedly at the Cossacks who were shaking him. They practically carried him out and had to support him all the way. Coming to the master's yard, he roused himself and asked to be given a pint of vodka. After drinking it, he smoothed the hair on his head and said, "There is all sorts of trash in this world, and such horrors happen as... oh well." At that, the philosopher waved his hand. The circle that had gathered around him hung their heads on hearing such words. Even the young boy whom all the servants considered their rightful representative when it came to such matters as cleaning the stables or toting water, even this poor boy also stood gaping. Just then a not entirely old wench passed by in a tight-fitting apron that displayed her round and firm shape. The old cook's assistant, a terrible flirt, who always found something to pin to her cap, a bit of ribbon or a carnation, or even a scrap of paper if there was nothing else. "Greetings, Hama," she said, seeing the philosopher. "Ay, ay, ay, what happened to you?" she cried out, clasping her hands. "What do you mean, foolish woman?" "Oh my God, but you've gone all grey." "Oh, and it's the truth she's telling," said Spirit, studying him intently. "You've really gone all grey, like our old youth too." On hearing this, the philosopher rushed headlong to the kitchen, where he had noticed a triangular piece of mirror glued to the wall and stained by flies, in front of which forget-me-nots, periwinkles, and even a garland of marigolds were stuck, showing that it was intended for the stylish flirt's toilet. He saw with horror the truth of their words. Half of his hair had indeed turned white. Hama hung his head and gave himself over to reflection. "I'll go to the master," he said finally, "tell him everything, and explain that I don't want to read anymore. Let him send me back to Kiev right now." In such thoughts he directed his steps toward the porch of the master's house. The sheep was sitting almost motionless in his room. The same hopeless sorrow that the philosopher had met on his face earlier remained there still. Only his cheeks were much more sunken than before. It was clear that he had taken very little foods, or perhaps not touched anything at all. His extraordinary pallor gave him a sort of stony immobility. "Greetings, poor lad," he said, seeing Hama, who stood hand in hand in the doorway. "Well, how is it with you? Everything fine?" Fine indeed. Such devilish goings on. I'd like to just grab my head and flee wherever my legs will take me." "How's that?" "It's your daughter, sir. Reasonably considering, of course. She's of noble birth. Nobody will maintain the contrary. Only not to anger you by saying so, God rest her soul. What about my daughter?" "She's had some dealings with Satan, giving me such horrors that I can't read any scriptures." Reads. It was not for nothing that she called you. She was worried about his soul, my little dove, and wished to drive away all wicked thoughts by prayer. "Have it your way, sir, by God. It's too much for me." Reads, the chief went on in the same admonitory voice. "You've got one night left now. You'll do a Christian deed, and I'll reward you." "Rewards or no rewards, as you like, sir, only I won't read," Hama said resolutely. "Listen, philosopher," said the chief, and his voice grew strong and menacing. "I don't like these notions. You can do that in your seminary, but not with me. I'll give you such a thrashing as your rector never gave. Do you know what a good lever whip is?" "How could I not?" said the philosopher, lowering his voice. "Everybody knows what a lever whip is. An insufferable thing in large quantities." "Yes, only you still don't know what a scotching my boys can deliver," the chief said menacingly, getting to his feet, and his face acquired an imperious and ferocious expression that revealed all his unbridled character, only temporarily lulled by sorrow. "First they'll scotch you for me, then douse you with vodka, then start over. Go, do your business. If you don't, you won't get up. If you do, 1,000 pieces of gold." Some customer, the philosopher thought, going out. No joking with this one. Just you wait, brother. I'll cut and run so fast your dogs will never catch me. And Hama resolved to escape without fail. He only waited till the time of the dinner, when the household people all had the habit of getting into the hay under the sheds and producing open mouths such as snoring and piping, that the yard came to resemble a factory. This time finally came. Even Yevtuch stretched out in the sun, his eyes closed. In fear and trembling, the philosopher quietly went to the garden, from where it seemed to him it would be easier and less conspicuous to escape into the fields. This garden, as commonly happens, was terribly overgrown and thus highly conducive to any secret undertaking, except for one path beaten down in household necessity. The rest was hidden by thickly spreading cherry trees. Elders, burdock that stuck its stale stalks with clingy pink knobs way up. Hops covered the top of this whole motley collection of trees and bushes like a net, forming a roof above them that spread over to the wattle fence and hung down its entwining snakes along with wild-field bluebells. Beyond the wattle fence that served as a boundary to the garden, there spread a whole forest of weeds, which no one seemed to be interested in, and the scythe would have broken to pieces if it had decided to put its blade to their thick, woody stems. As the philosopher went to step over the wattle fence, his teeth chattered and his heart pounded so hard that it frightened him. The skirt of his long chlamys seemed stuck to the ground, as if someone had nailed it down. As he was stepping over, it seemed to him that some voice rattled in his ears with a deafening whistle. Where to? Where to? The philosopher flitted into the weeds and broke into a run, constantly stumbling over old roots and crushing moss underfoot. He could see that once he got through the weeds, all he had to do was run across the fields beyond which darkled a thicket of blackthorn, where he reckoned he would be safe, and passing through which he supposed he could come to the road straight to Kiev. He ran across the field at once and wound up amid the dense blackthorns. He got through the blackthorns, leaving pieces of his frock coat and every sharp thorn in lieu of a tall, and found himself in a small hollow. A willow spread its hanging branches almost to the ground. A small spring shone pure silver. The philosopher's first business was to lie down and drink his fill, because he felt unbearably thirsty. Good water, he said, wiping his mouth. I could rest here. No, better keep running. You might have somebody after you. These words came from above his ears. He turned. Before him stood Yevtuch. Yevtuch, you devil, the philosopher thought to himself. I could just take you by the legs and beat you, vile muggin, and whatever else you've got with an oak log. You oughtn't to have made such a detour, Yevtuch went on. Much better to take the path I did, straight past the stables, and it's too bad about the frock coat. Good broadcloth. How much did you pay per yard? Anyhow, we've had a nice walk. It's time for home. The philosopher, scratching himself, trudged after Yevtuch. The accursed witch will give me a hot time now, he thought. Though what's with me, really? What am I afraid of? Am I not a Cossack? I did read for 2 nights. God will help me with the third. The accursed witch must have done a good deal of sinning for the unclean powers to stand by her like that. These reflections occupied him as he entered the master's yards. Having encouraged himself with such observations, he persuaded Darosh, who through his connection with the stewards occasionally had access to the master's cellar, to fetch a jug of rotgut, and the two friends sitting under the shed supped not much less than half a bucket, so that the philosopher, suddenly getting to his feet, shouted, "Musicians! We must have musicians!" And without waiting for the musicians, broke into a tree bark in the cleared spots in the middle of the yard. He danced until it came time for the afternoon snack, when the household people, standing in a circle round him, as is usual in such cases, finally spat and went away, saying, "Look how long the man's been dancing." Finally the philosopher went right to sleep, and only a good dosing with cold water could wake him up for supper. Over supper he talked about what a Cossack is, and how he should not be afraid of anything in the world. "It's time," said Yevtuk. "Let's go." "Bite and nail, your cursed dog," thought the philosopher, and getting to his feet said, "Let's go." On the way the philosopher constantly glanced to right and left and tried to talk a little with his guides, but Yevtuk kept mum. The Rosh himself was untalkative. The night was infernal, far off a whole pack of wolves howled, and even the dog's barking was somehow frightening. "Seems like it's something else howling. That's not a wolf," said the Rosh. Yevtuk kept mum. The philosopher found nothing to say. They approached the church and stepped in under its decrepit walls, which showed how little the owner of the estate cared about God and his own soul. Yevtuk and the Rosh withdrew as before, and the philosopher remained alone. Everything was the same. Everything had the same menacingly familiar look. He paused for a minute. In the middle, as ever, stood the motionless coffin of the terrible witch. "I won't be afraid, by God. I won't be afraid," he said, and again drawing a circle round himself, he began recalling all his incantations. The silence was dreadful. The candles flickered, pouring light all over the church. The philosopher turned one page, then another, and noticed that he was not reading what was in the book at all. He feared he crossed himself and began to sing. This cheered him somewhat. The reading went ahead, and the pages flashed by one after another. Suddenly, amidst the silence, the iron lid of the coffin burst with a crack, and the dead body rose. It was still more horrible than the first time. Its teeth clacked horribly, row against row. Its lips twitched convulsively, and, with wild shrieks, incantations came rushing out. Wind whirled through the church, icons fell to the floor, broken glass dropped from the windows, the doors tore from their hinges, and a numberless host of monsters flew into God's church. A terrible noise of wings and scratching claws filled the whole church. Everything flew and rushed about, seeking the philosopher everywhere. Hamas had cleared of the last trace of drunkenness. He just kept crossing himself and reading prayers at random. And at the same time he heard the unclean powers flitting about him, all but brushing him with the tips of their wings and repulsive tails. He did not have the courage to look at them closely. He only saw the whole wall occupied by a huge monster, standing amidst its own tangled hair, as in a forest. Through the web of hair two eyes stared horribly, the eyebrows raised slightly. Above it in the air there was something like an immense bubble, with 1,000 tongues and scorpion stings reaching from its middle. Black earth hung on them in lumps. They all looked at him, searching, unable to see him, surrounded by the mysterious circle. "Bring V, go get V," the words of the dead body rang out. And suddenly, there was silence in the church. The wolves howling could be heard far away, and soon heavy footsteps rang out in the church. With a sidelong glance, he saw them leading in some squat, hefty, splay-footed man. He was black earth all over. His earth-covered legs and arms stuck out like strong, sinewy roots. Heavily he trod, stumbling all the time. His long eyelids were lowered to the ground. With horror, Hama noticed that the face of him was made of iron. He was brought in under the arms and put right by the place where Hama stood. "Lift my eyelids, I can't see," they said in a subterranean voice, and the entire host rushed to lift his eyelids. "Don't look," some inner voice whispered to the philosopher. He could not help himself and looked. "There he is," they cried and fixed an iron finger on him, and all that were there fell upon the philosopher. Breathless, he crashed to the ground, and straightway the spirit flew out of him in terror. A cock-crow rang out. This was already the second cock-crow. The gnomes had missed the first. The frightened spirits rushed pell-mell to the windows and doors in order to fly out quickly, but nothing doing, and so they stayed there, stuck in the doors and windows. When the priest came in, he stopped at the sight of such disgrace in God's sanctuary, and did not dare serve the panihida in such a place. So the church remained forever with monsters stuck in its doors and windows, overgrown with forest, roots, weeds, wild blackthorn, and no one can find the path to it. When rumors of this reached Kiev, and the theologian Halava heard finally that such had been the lot of the philosopher Hama, he fell to thinking for a whole hour. In the meantime, great changes had happened with him. Fortune had smiled on him. Upon completing his studies, he had been made bell ringer of the tallest belfry, and he almost always went about with a bloody nose, because the wooden stairs of the belfry had been put together every which way. "Have you heard what happened with Hama?" Zagari Garbets, by then the philosopher and sporting a fresh moustache, said, coming up to him. "It's what God granted him," said the ringer, however. "Let's go to the tavern and commemorate his soul." The young philosopher, who had come into his rights with the passion of an enthusiast, so that his trousers and frock coats and even his head gave off a whiff of spirits and coarse tobacco, instantly expressed his readiness. "Hama was a nice man," said the ringer, as the lame tavern keeper set the third mug down in front of him. "A fine man, and he perished for nothing." "No, I know why he perished. Because he got scared. If he hadn't been scared, the witch couldn't have done anything to him. You just have to cross yourself and spit right on her tail, and nothing will happen. I know all about it. Here in Kiev, the women sitting in the marketplace are all witches." To this the ringer nodded as a sign of agreement, but noticing that his tongue was unable to articulate a single word, he carefully got up from the table and, swaying from side to side, went off to hide himself in the remotest part of the woods, withal not forgetting, out of long habit, to steal an old wood saw that was lying on a bench. My lovely sweethearts, thank you for listening to this story till the end. I really hope you liked it. If you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I wish you the most beautiful dreams.